Okay, we are recording, and since you are on the big screen, why don't you start by introducing yourself, and then we'll go down the list.
Oh, me? Okay.
Yeah.
Hello, I'm Jarad Greene. I'm a cartoonist, so I write and illustrate comics for a living. I also work for a place called the Center for Cartoon Studies, which is a graduate school for cartoonists and storytellers in White River Junction, Vermont. It's a 2-year MFA and certificate program. And so I'm their administrative and development coordinator. I'm not a faculty member, but I sort of work behind the scenes to bring great people into the school. And yeah, and so I work there part-time, and then the rest of my time is spent working on my own comics.
Dana?
Hey, good morning, everybody. My name is Dana Rosengard, and I am the managing editor of the NBC newsroom in Bangor, Maine. I spent 5.5 years in the Northeast Kingdom when I was a faculty member at Lyndon State College, so I miss that area very much. I started as a television news reporter, ended up being an anchor, went into college teaching for a good long while, and now I'm back in the newsroom.
Beth, you want to go ahead?
Sure. I'm Beth Kanell. I live in Waterford. I'm a writer and an editor. And until a year and a half ago, I edited more of the time than I was writing because I needed to rely on my income. And I'm now in a free fall, take all kinds of risks period where I'm writing like mad about 90% of my time and having a ball. And I'll tell you all about it later.
And Kathy?
Hi, I'm just an attendee for this, so I'm not actually a panelist.
That's right.
So I'm just going to be listening.
I just saw you so much earlier today. I should have remembered that you were.
No.
Okay. So students, do you guys have questions? And Kathy, you may want to, being an attendee, you may want to stop your video, please. Thank you. So students, do you have any questions? Please write them in the chat and I will ask them. Since we're waiting on some questions to come up, I guess some of them that came up earlier when people were signing up is, what are some examples, and this will work pretty easily with this group, what are examples of creativity that you guys have in your work place? And Dana, you want to start?
Sure, I'm happy to start. There's a ton of it, to be honest with you, because the lowest common denominator for success in my field is writing, which I'm sure Beth can relate to. And I don't think there's anything more creative than looking at a blank page or screen and having to put words on it. So certainly that's where the creativity starts. And I would suggest that whether you're turning content for digital or online or social media or television, we're shooting video every day and editing that video every day. So there's a lot of creativity in what you give yourself to work with and then what you do with it once you have it.
Yeah, there's definitely creativity in both of my jobs, but especially in making comics. Here, I can show you. This is the new book that I'm working on. And so it's literally all writing and drawing, like pages and pages and pages. So it's a lot of like planning. And then taking all of the planning that I've done and then sort of letting myself be as creative as possible with designing characters and environments, writing all the dialogue, thinking about page layouts. So that's really important in comics, is how you actually read the page and go from like scene to scene. I usually color my own work. Not every cartoonist does that, but thinking about the color story in scenes, but also in a story overall is really important. What kind of mood do I want to create? all those sorts of like creative choices are, it can be overwhelming because there's so many creative choices that I have to like manage, and I just try to take it like one step at a time. But yeah, it's all a part of my job. And even working for a school, like I'm helping out with different publications and things like that, or posting on social media. And so it's a creativity, but just kind of in a different way. So yeah.
I try to start every morning by taking a walk outside. It gets my brain going, but it also gets me focused on things that aren't inside me, looking at trees, animal tracks, thinking about the sky and how the colors of the day relate to what I want to write. I'll often write a piece of poetry before I start anything else for the day. Poetry doesn't pay much. I do get paid for some of it, but it's this part of me. It's the core of me, and I need to write the poems to be creative in everything else I'm doing. I just finished writing a novel. It's a pandemic novel called Queen of the Kingdom, meaning Northeast Kingdom. So I'm in a new stage on that. And yesterday I had my first meeting with an agent. I don't know if she'll become my agent for this book, but I'm so excited. And that means I go from creative into analytic mode right away with a list of everything that happened in all the chapters, because I have to write up a synopsis for the agent that she'll use to help other people think about the book. So I have to flip back and forth a lot between planning and analyzing, and then just trying to open the gates wide open. So what I do to sort of stay on track, and maybe you do this too, I make myself a list each evening that has the critical things for the next day. And if I can get the critical things done or feel like I'm getting them done, then I also have permission to myself to just get out there and write a new story, a new historical piece. Dana, you reminded me that when I was first reaching for how to be more creative, I actually took a newspaper job for 2 years. I was urged to do it by the very ultra creative writer, Bill Lederer, who lived in Peacham, a really wild man, who said the best way to get yourself writing a lot is to put yourself on newspaper deadlines.
That was true for me too. I worked as a newspaper cartoonist when I was first starting out. So the constant deadline was like, all right, if you want to do this, then you have to, if you want to see your work in print and you want to keep being printed, you got to meet the deadline. And there were some days where I was like, all right, the deadline's in an hour. I better draw really fast.
Because I taught my students for years and years what the root word of deadline was.
Very, very good. So we do have some questions coming up. Jarad, one of the, and I guess it goes to everybody, if anybody does like anime type drawings, and I know I have a son who is kind of in between, he's 15 and he's kind of writing, he loves animation and Japanese anime. And so just kind of, one, if you're drawing that, and I guess if I were to ask from him, how do you get, started where when you don't have necessarily have an art background? So, and this, it goes out to everybody because other people may have some hidden drawing skills in there. So.
As far as animating, I don't particularly do animation. I've done some animated GIFs, and I've taken like an animation workshop before. It's not my specialty. There are plenty of cartoonists who also work in animation. On a lot of animation companies look to comics to find storytellers to come and work on their productions. That's a pretty common thing, because if you make like a mini comic or a graphic novel or something, they're getting to see how you conduct your storytelling, like pacing and character and all of that is seen in your work. And so they can say, hey, I think you'd be a great writer on my, animated television show, or I love your designs. Like, I'd love for you to be a character designer. So that's certainly like a path into that field, but I don't particularly do anything like that. I did so for my book Scullion, I had done, when I took this animation workshop, I like animated some of the characters, which was kind of fun to see. But yeah, I wish I could do that, but doing comics takes enough time, and doing animation takes even more time. And there's only so much time in a day. So I don't tend to do that. And there was a
Yeah,
second
can you-
question you asked. And
Can you explain kind of the difference between, when you say doing comics and doing animation? I think that may be helpful for people to kind of explain how they may differ, just to kind of the free drawing compared to working in the animation field.
Sure. So for comics, like I am planning out like pages of the story and, writing different scenes. And it's all sort of, the moments are happening like panel by panel, whereas in animation, usually you only do like one task. You're part of a huge team, whereas I did this entire book. I wrote, penciled, inked, colored this entire book myself. Whereas if you work on a production, you're one of like 200 people, and your job may be to draw all the props. And so you're literally like the person who does like the cups in a scene. You're not usually somebody who's going to do all the backgrounds and all the characters and all the dialogue. It's like those are all different tasks. So yeah, you end up sort of specializing in one thing, and you may move around on different shows or movies or whatnot. But with comics, you have to wear all the hats for the most part. There are a lot of people who hire colorists to color their work, but even the team style of like Marvel and DC of one person penciling and one person inking is a lot less common these days. Usually like you're having to do all of it yourself. Or a lot of people choose to do it themselves. Like for me personally, like I love inking, and that's just a part of the process that I wouldn't want to give up and ask somebody else to do that. So it's kind of nice to be sort of the master of your own universe and making all the decisions. It's a lot of decisions to make, but I don't know, it's kind of really satisfying when it's all said and done, because I know that it's all my own work.
I noticed that Bella mentioned she animates on her phone. And I'm thinking, I've seen my grandsons do that also. They'll take a character and suddenly it's moving and they're doing things with it. But that's way outside of my field. And I'm wondering, Jarad, if you could say whether animation like that would fit into the School of Cartoon Studies, or where someone would go to get deeper experience with it.
At CCS, we focus on storytelling through comics specifically. So we don't really we do a little portion on animated GIFs because that's pretty simple and super short. But there are some like animation programs. I'm not super familiar with them because I never really pursued it. I know there's a couple schools in California. There's Cal Arts, which is sort of the famous animation school. And I think there's programs at like MICA and at SBA in New York City that, teach those, but certainly doing comics and drawing and all of that is a part of animation. And so getting a background in, drawing and color and drawing environments and people, like all of that, helps in whether you work in comics or animation or you switch between both.
That makes sense to me. I've been so excited that CTS is here in Vermont that we can reach it so easily and network with it too.
Yeah.
Dana, I'm thinking about newspapers in this age of cell phones and cell phone news and all of us being online so much of the time. Is that changing your life?
To go back to the last comment I made about deadline, the concept of deadline is gone because it's no longer the 6 and the 11 o'clock news, period, end of story. I covered a Dr. Jill Biden appearance here in Bangor yesterday, and we are streaming that live online with one camera while we are covering it for broadcast with a second camera. And so the need and expectation for immediacy has completely changed the news business, whether it was television or print, because, a typical newspaper, the expression was went to bed maybe at midnight, because at some point they actually have to roll the paper and put the ink on it and cut it up and put it on trucks and get it to your door. But now with, Twitter and Facebook, and we all obviously have strong digital operations, as soon as we know it, we tell you about it, even if all we know is a sentence.
And
That's where we start.
I'm thinking that must mean you have to know a lot about something before you're even on the scene in order to be able to comment about it.
Yes, our reporters are expected to tweet and post before they get there. Yeah.
Do you find it exhausting or exciting or both?
Oh, no, exhilarating.
Ah,
Oh, good.
And important, to be honest with you.
mhm.
But it never stops. It never ends.
I noticed that one of the questions people asked in advance was whether we knew at middle school what we were going to do. And for sure, I did not. I just was doing whatever people told me to do in classes and getting things done. I didn't start to really make choices until sort of when I was applying to college. How about you?
Yeah, I feel similarly. I think when I was in middle school, I wanted to like make props for movies. I always thought that would be a cool job. And I used to like, I would see a movie or a TV show or whatever, or even reading books and stuff, I would try to like make something from it out of clay or paper or whatever. Yeah, it wasn't until, I mean, I was always drawing and writing, but I just, in graphic novels, like didn't really even exist when I was in middle school. There were periodical comics, like floppy comics and comics in the newspaper, but like seeing a book like this, there was nothing like this. Certainly not with this sort of style. Everything was very realistic and had this like airbrushed look to it that I just always tried to imitate, but I never could kind of get there. And yeah, it wasn't until, I mean, I was in my like mid 20s when I was like, oh my gosh, there's this thing that I have all these skills to do. I guess I could try to do this for a living.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I think
Dana?
I think when I was in middle school, all I wanted to do was be as big and strong and smart as my two older brothers. And I failed on all three counts. I'm sure that I knew I would go to college. That was never a question in my family. And I went and I studied communications, which back when I was in school was referred to as the touchy-feely major. But it did teach me how to think critically and process information and deliver it effectively. So even though I didn't know it at the time, it was a great conduit or path to journalism. But it really wasn't until I started looking at graduate school, so I was already 22 plus years of age, before I became focused on what I thought I wanted to pursue as a career.
That was the same for me. I studied criminology and criminal justice in school, and I thought I was going to go to law school. But I was working on the student newspaper, doing a comic strip. I was doing theater. I studied public relations, and yeah, so I did like a bunch of different things, and didn't really know that it would work out the way that it has. But
right, and if we go back to the very first question about creativity, I'm not sure if creativity is valued to the extent that it deserves to be valued in the primary and middle, junior high, and even high school levels. Yeah. And I think that the parents among us might have this fear. We want our kids to succeed, to be independent, and to be able to live a life that maybe we wanted, which might be different from the life they want.
Yeah.
And so I would say to any of the young students who are listening to us today or in the future, if creativity is your thing, here you have 3 good examples of people doing pretty okay when the lowest common denominator among the 3 of us is probably that word, creativity.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that that's really important what you guys are talking about. And I know working with students, I talk a lot about your interest, and your interests tend to lead you in a direction. You may not know it at the particular time, but your interests, as Jarad can attest to, your outside interest from your major may end up being what you end up doing. And I think that's really important. And as a parent of a 15-year-old who loves animation, loves to write, I totally encourage him. I mean, he doesn't like to write for his English class, and So you guys can, students can listen to this. Sometimes you may not like what you having to write, but you're learning skills. So in your free time, you're able to work with those skills. I think is really important.
That's great, Matthew. I wish that I had known, I was the first in my family to go to a full 4-year college. And I wish that I had known that I could go and talk with people who lived differently from my family. I kind of only talked with people who were similar, so I wasn't nervous. But if I'd gone and talked with other people whose families did college differently, I would have had more of a leg up. I'm also noticing in the chat right now that both Bella and Connor are talking about having multiple things they want to do. And I know for me, I started with a science background, but it was writing I wanted to do the most. Although I did think about legal at one point, Jarad. What about you guys? Did you have multiple things you wanted to do?
Yeah, I mean, like the law school thing I was pretty serious about it for a while. And it's funny because I think like sort of what Dana was saying, that I used to take my parents' like practicality as discouragement, but it wasn't that at all. I thought it was at the time, but as I got older, I was like, oh no, they just like, want me to be able to pay my rent and buy groceries. They don't want me to not do what I want to do. And they were always encouraging me to like draw my comics and keep doing that. But yeah, I mean, I worked in journalism for 8 years, or maybe even longer than that, like journalism education. And I really, all the people I worked with were amazing, but what I was noticing was that, journalists especially are really, the ones who stay in it for their whole career are really passionate about journalism. They love journalism. It's like what they're meant to do. And that was me, but with comics. But it just took a while to sort of realize like, this has been a thing I've been working on with all these other jobs. I've always been making my own comics just for myself, and having other jobs actually allowed me to kind of work on whatever I wanted and really say no to like freelance things. If I'm like, oh, I don't really want to draw a logo for someone's like exercise company, like that doesn't sound fun. I'm just going to do whatever I want. And because I have another job, I'm not relying on that income. So I can just pick and choose what I want to do. And ultimately that was sort of really developing my voice and my skills. So that when somebody was like, all right, we want you to do a book for us. I'm like, okay, I can do that. Yep. So it took a while to get there.
Confidence makes a big difference.
I did very well on the math SAT, and that led me first to study engineering, for which I had no passion, for which I had no interest. But to be honest, it was something my parents understood. And that evolved over my undergraduate career. And one of the things that I want to make sure I see the word meteorology from Bella. And I can tell you that Lyndon State College has one of the maybe top 5 meteorology schools in the United States of America. And not so much to plug my career alma mater, because I taught there, I did not go to school there. It brings up a point that I want to make sure that anybody who hears this down the road, journalism is much more than being a reporter or being an anchor. And when I was in the 8th grade, or even in the 18th grade, I didn't realize that. And it wasn't until I was a reporter in Greenville, Mississippi, and became an anchor at that station eventually, that I started to see that there were all of these other people that were necessary to get that product on the air. And so I ended up very quickly becoming a producer, which was something I didn't know what it was, but it allowed me to leave Greenville, Mississippi and go to Columbus, Ohio, and then Providence, Rhode Island, and then Boston, which is where I'm from. And I was a producer, but there are people who are just writers. There are, Jarad, in the bigger stations, there are graphic artists. Mm-hmm. I mean, people who spend their whole day creating some of those visual things that you sometimes see over the anchor's shoulder, or full screen graphics like a PowerPoint slide to help us get a point across that you don't have video for, like the COVID numbers. How many more cases do we have today versus last week? And so somebody generates those. And there are photographers and directors and technical directors and satellite truck operators. There are so many potential opportunities. You don't just have to be a reporter or an anchor or a sports guy or a weather person. And so anybody who, if information is your thing and creativity is part of your thing, and you want to do something with impact, then there is likely a place for you under that really big umbrella of journalism.
Yeah, and when I was sort of how I kind of broke in, I feel like with comics was that I had an internship as a coloring assistant, which I mean, I knew people colored comics, but I didn't really know how they did it or how they worked or anything. And working as the person who sort of lays all the base colors down to like prepare the files for the final colors, like that was like a master class and like learning something that I wasn't really sure was all that interesting to me, and I ended up really loving it a lot. And I remember the editor that had hired me said, this is a great way to like sort of build rapport with a lot of people behind the scenes. And what ended up happening is one of the editors one of the editorial assistants that I worked with, while they would like send me the files and I would ask questions back and forth, and then eventually they got promoted to editor, and I met them like a year after I had been working for them off and on, and they were like, oh, hey, like I'm an editor now, like do you have any ideas for a book? And I sent them Scullion, and they ended up buying it. So it was like this crazy sort of, never would have thought that helping out on the colors of books would land me getting like a writing job essentially. And so it's all interesting, like, you have to kind of be open to whatever jobs are in your industry, and maybe it's a job that you've never heard of before, and just taking the time to learn it can go a long way, and you may not realize it at the outset.
And you've both just given really good examples of how your networking plays into not just what you're doing, but what you have the outreach to do in the future. So I'm an introvert. I mean, I've known that for a long time, and writers supposedly who are introverts just sit in a room and type. But I actually can't just do that. I have to talk with other people, and the other writers around me are so important to me, especially when I reach a point where I'm questioning what I've done or I need a boost. A lot of stuff for me comes back to confidence. And if I'm feeling confident, I can do almost anything. But on a low day, I need my network.
For sure. That's so true. Yeah, definitely got that at CCS for me, finding people that were coming in at the same level as me, and not just like trying to be friends with people who had like 10 books and were super well known and all that. It's like who you start out with, who's on like the same rung on the ladder, end up becoming like your community that you rise with and you help each other out. And two of my really good friends from grad school, like we all sort of were breaking in small ways at the same time. And I'd be like, what does your contract say about this? Or like, how much would you ask? How much would you charge for this sort of thing? And, having that network. And then slowly as we're like, coming up together, it's been really nice, because then you have people who kind of understand how things work on the inside, and you can, nobody wants to complain about their job because it sounds, it doesn't sound great. But when it's somebody who sort of came up with you and understands the struggles, it's like, okay, I have that person I can sort of offload, not publicly like online, but I can be like, oh my gosh, this is the really hard, annoying part of my job. And they're like, oh, I totally get it. That's like, it's actually like really invaluable. And I never would have realized that.
Yeah, a couple things for you students to think about is earlier, Kathy was talking about the career clusters, and often you may find that inside a career cluster, you will see a job that you like. If you find a career cluster that's the definition seems to fit you, then looking at everything else inside of that. I think that's what Dana was talking about in the journalism, that you spread out, you don't even know that career exists, but because it's in an area that interests you, it may really end up turning into something that you like. Like I always share with kids, like I would copy the sports page and sections and statistics out of the sports page. And I never knew you could get paid to tell somebody that this batter in the 7th inning at night against a fastball pitcher with 2 outs hits 300. And to me, I find that fascinating, and other people would probably go, what? But there is a lot of different things out there that can really help you as you start to unfold careers, but don't look at them traditionally. I think is really an important way to think about that.
Bella and Connor are having a little discussion in the chat window there about colleges and where to study art. And I can tell you that there are some obvious places, but that there are probably a lot of very large, the land grant state universities across the country who all have really strong art programs. And I would encourage you, whether it's art for these two or for maybe Brooke or Kinsey, to be very aggressive about exploring where you might want to spend that time and energy and money, and to be as brave as you can be about how far you're willing to go to be where you belong. And you can always change your mind. You can always change your major. You can always transfer to another school. But I would suggest strongly that at 18, it will never be easier, although frightening, to go far away from home. But it's the time to try. And so whether you go to RISD, the Rhode Island School of Design, SCAD, the Savannah College of Art and Design, or if you find a great program at the University of California at Irvine, poke your nose into those programs, which is so much easier for you to do online than it ever was for, I'll just say, people of my age prior to the internet, and have really honest and strong conversations with your parents and with your grandparents, if need be, your counselors at school and your teachers about what makes the most sense for you. But I would ask you to be brave. There are endless choices and opportunities. Be really brave and aggressive about finding the one for you.
I like that. I also think that asking people like us where they went to college can be helpful. And I picked a very, very big school. I picked Michigan State University, partly because I had a secret desire to be a circus veterinarian. And I knew that if I really, really wanted to, there was a part of Michigan State University that could teach me that. But it also has an awesome art department. It has an incredible legal school. It has political science that I'd never even thought about before I got there and saw other people who liked political science. And I had a really good time being a chemistry major. I should say, to put things in perspective, that when I went to college from 1969 to 72, there were 8 people in the chemistry department as majors, and 2 of them were girls. So gender things have changed a lot since I went to school, and that would, I think, today change where I would choose to go. I would take more risks, and as you're saying, Dana, I would be more brave, I think.
So I went to the University of New Hampshire as an undergraduate, and I am from the Merrimack Valley of Massachusetts, the northern suburbs of Boston. And I went to the University of New Hampshire based on that engineering degree and the fact that I thought I was going to be an Air Force pilot. Well, that all changed within 3 semesters. And to be honest with you, I didn't have the courage to transfer from UNH. And I was happy there personally. And so when I first looked for graduate work, I was very methodical about where I thought I wanted to go. And I had a job right out of UNH that had me traveling quite a bit. So I was able to physically visit many, many, many colleges and universities. And I applied to only 2 programs, and I got accepted to both. And I went to the one that I was shocked to get admitted to, and that was the Medill School of Journalism at Northwestern University. So I went there, and that was the perfect place for me. It gave me exactly what I wanted. When I switched careers from television news to teaching, and I found myself at Lyndon State College, I thought, well, this is weird. I'm a teacher now, and I've never studied education. I was confident, going back to your keyword, Beth, that the content I had under control, what journalism was, why it was important, how to do it. but to deliver the message and the instruction is a completely different challenge. So while I was at Linden, I studied for a second master's degree at Johnson State College. And it was wildly interesting to be a teacher on a Monday during the day, a student Monday night, and then a teacher again Tuesday morning. And so in 3.5 years, I played with that process. And I suppose I would confidence, I became a better teacher. And then when it came time to swim in a bigger pond, you know, Linden State College is sort of a small place. And after 5.5 years, I knew I needed to be a smaller fish in a bigger pond, as they say. And I applied again to 2 PhD programs. And I got accepted to the first. I didn't get accepted to my first choice the first time. And so I spent a summer at the second choice. And this is about being brave and being an explorer. I went to the University of Memphis. I took 2 courses in the doctoral program. And in one of them, I thought I was the smartest person in the room. And in the other one, I didn't care about the content at all. And I didn't want to be the smartest person in the room. And I didn't want to go somewhere where they didn't make me care about the content. So I came back to Linden and applied to that other program again and got into the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill and got a full ride fellowship and spent 2.5 years in a 3-year program, got in and got out with the PhD. And so I guess the moral of the story is you're a little bit of a pinball machine in the game of life, a pinball in the game of life. And sometimes you get batted around places you don't know. You have to go along for the ride. And you have to, again, be brave and be aggressive about finding the right programs for you. So many options.
Yeah, it's sort of similar to me. So I grew up in Tampa, Florida, but I went to the University of South Carolina in Columbia, South Carolina. Mm-hmm. And basically I had gotten into Florida State as well. But the cost was, I had gotten a scholarship at USC. And so the cost to go to either one was exactly the same. And so I was like, I'm going to go somewhere different. I'm not going to go where it's basically going to be like the 13th grade. And so I mean, it was scary. I didn't know. I knew my sister also went there, but yeah, I didn't know a soul, and so it was like totally new territory. And at the time, I did feel like I was studying what I wanted, somewhat what I wanted to do. But I would say, like, if you're looking at options and whatnot, one thing that I realized after college was something really valuable was internships, which was not emphasized in my program and wasn't, I just didn't even think to do that. It is emphasized in certain programs at USC, but not in mine. And especially in grad school, like realizing how important my internship ended up being, like just getting that like actual experience at an actual like company or something that does what you're trying to do, even if you ultimately decide that you don't like it, is super, super valuable. And yeah, and I also, worked in the real world. I had like I said, a job working for these like journalism nonprofits. And, I appreciate that. I learned a lot on those jobs. Ultimately, it wasn't what I wanted to do. But then when I decided to go to grad school, it was a similar thing. I was like, I looked into a couple of programs. I knew that CCS was the program that I wanted to do. It's super small. They, at the most, they only accept 24 people a year. And people from all over the world like are trying to go to CCS. And so I was like, this is the only place I want to go. If I just want to go here and I'm only going to apply here. And I did ultimately get accepted. And it just like, I think because I had the real world experience leading up to that, I kind of knew exactly what I wanted. And I'm really glad I didn't go to grad school like right away. Because it just made me appreciate it like so much more. And I knew it was the program that I wanted.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So
It's okay to like take your time. Don't rush.
So I'm just gonna input a little bit, and then I want you guys to think about while I'm talking, just some closing thoughts, because we're getting near the 12 o'clock time spot. And so to the students, I think it's really important. Right now, when I was your age and even a little bit older, I got much less input than you guys are going to get in this hour about what to do and where you want to go. And, you know, I ended up in a business school, and it took me about 3 weeks knowing business, maybe not even that, maybe that I wasn't a business major. But, you know, I went there, I had soccer, I played soccer, which was really nice. And I did a few other things. So college is going to be a lot more than just what you're going to learn in the classroom. So when you're looking at schools, really think about how you fit into the whole school. And when I went back to college after leaving the first time, it, I got an degree in education, but it was the work study job that I had that really gave me the skills that I use as a outreach counselor today, and pointed me in, I think people were talking about networking earlier, pointed me in the direction of where I can find jobs and who I can work with. So, you know, there's a lot more than just the major that you're going to look for when you start looking for schools. And I think you probably have heard that, but I just wanted to emphasize that before we close. But just, I guess, from you three guys, if there's something that you would just like to give as parting comments to the students about your careers and or how they get to where they want to go.
I think everything that's come along in my life has turned out to be of use in what I've chosen to do. And that's the plus of picking a creative career as opposed to a strictly analytic career. If I were still working in a chemistry lab, which I did for 2 years, I wouldn't be having anywhere near the kind of fun I'm having now.
Yeah, I think similarly, yeah, I have an appreciation for all the like odd jobs that I had when I had like 3 part-time jobs, and it was, you know, a weird circus of things. And but always finding a way to be creative. A lot of times it was just, you know, outside of my job time in the evening, I would go to the library and just like work on my comics, and on the weekends and whatnot. And that was all great. And I think, yeah, finding ways to be creative despite whatever your situation might be, and despite like having to have a job that you may or may not like, because ultimately I was still honing those skills. And eventually when the opportunity came, I was like, oh, well, I'm like ready to do this. I'm capable of doing this.
3 closing thoughts pop into my head. The first 2 are, remember, it's not a race. Second, it's not a competition.
Mm-hmm.
And third, I think that really people smarter than I have said that we tend to regret the things we don't do more than the things we do. And so that takes me back to the be aggressive, be bold, be brave, go far, but do it all with purpose and intent.
And friends.
Sure.
Friends make it all more fun and a little bit easier when you're being brave.
So we still have a couple more minutes, and you know, first off, I want to thank both groups, students. You guys have asked and had some great conversations and some great thoughts along this, and I think that's that you guys, the way your mind is working and the way you guys are thinking about things, I think is really going to help you a lot. And for panelists, I really enjoyed listening to you guys. And I picked this because I spent the summer, you guys, paddling around the Northeast Kingdom. I just ended up paddling over 63 different bodies of water this summer. And I used, I've written a couple pieces, and I was like debating, people said you should write Quiet Waters or something, debating about writing some stuff. And it's not my strength, but we'll see where it goes. But I wrote a piece about watching an eagle rise from from the shore as I came around the corner and just kind of describing it. And then I created a yoga move from that. But when I shared it with my students, you guys, we talked about who might write this, from environmentalists to photographers to outreach counselors. Where might we publish it? And how many different careers, in this case, I think Dana brought this up a lot, how many different careers would it take to publish this piece? And I think if you guys continue to look at college and your careers in those ways, where it's just, you start with one idea and then you see how far it can take you in different directions, that can really be beneficial to you. Because if we had 100 people in here in this thing and you all knew what you wanted to do, probably 70% of you are going to be doing something different at age 25. And all 4 of the adults, I think all 5 of the adults that are in this are doing something different than they thought they would be doing at your age. So things will change, but it's the journey and the experience that is really helpful for you.
Well, I know there were some students who didn't talk this time in the chat. And I just want to say, I'm thinking of you anyway. We're not ignoring you, and we hope you got something from what we brought. You're important too.
And thank you all for listening.
And thank you guys for coming.
Everybody be well and stay safe. Wash those hands.
Glad to hear, Connor, that you guys got a lot out of this. I think it was, I think you guys picked the right group for your interests, for sure. Even if it wasn't your interest, I think you would have learned a lot from these speakers.
Great.
And I'm trying to remember if they're just going to yank us out of here or
You
because
probably need to stop recording first and then leave the room.
End of show, just blank screen. This is all.
what did you say? Don't stop recording before you leave the room.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to do that.